If you could begin by explaining what the decimas are.
The decima actually originated in the Canary Islands, and they tell me it came from southern Spain to begin with. Our families, when they came over, they brought with them, naturally, their culture and singing of the decimas. It's 10 stanzas to begin. Now, they've kept adding to them, you know. Our people sang them for their own entertainment. They had lost, after so many years, close to 100 years, without a priest and without a teacher, they lost the ability to read and write in Spanish. So the decimas were hand-me-down from generation to generation, telling of whatever happened in the communities, the problems, never about anything sad. If they had a night like the 1915 storm, they didn't write a decima of it. They figured it was too sad. But the things, the decima, they sang them at weddings and dances. It was a form of entertainment, but it was also a form of keeping our history. We have decimas from the time our people left the Canary Islands to the time to our day, nowadays, so you can see what the decima meant to us. And in order to know these lineages, you got to know the decimas. The song, or the decima I'm going to sing now, is one that was composed in the 30s. This was composed whenever our people had a bad winter. You had a storm the year before, or high waters, and they couldn't trap the muskrat. They couldn't trap the animal, the fur-bearing animal. Then they had to survive some kind of way, so they went to fishing crabs. So the crab fisherman song talks about the hardships a crab fisherman goes through in the month of February. And it talks about everything. The last part of the song states, when a crab fisherman dies, don't mourn for him, because he's going to a better world. And the song goes this way. Yo me arrimé a la costa, buscándome el abriguito. Yo me arrimé a la costa, buscándome el abriguito. Sentí una voz que decía, y aquí estoy yo heladito. Era un pobre jaibero pescando en el mes de febrero. Y salió calando derecho para el otro lado. Y se encontró otro jaibero que estaba medio helado. Era un pobre jaibero pescando en el mes de febrero. Lo conchó a la costa, donde estaba el batimiento. Lo conchó a la costa, donde estaba el batimiento. Entonces dice el jaibero, maldita sea tanto viento. Era un pobre jaibero pescando en el mes de febrero. De una lata a la otra, de un pobre jaibero. De una lata a la otra, de un pobre jaibero. Se fue a tierra corta paja y le cayó un avispero. Entonces dice el jaibero, maldita sea el mes de febrero. Parece que tenía rabia, se botó de cuatro patas. El compañero que ha visto eso, le cayó atrás con la lata. Era un pobre jaibero, pescando en el mes de febrero. Cuando se muere un jaibero, que nadie le ponga luto. Cuando se muere un jaibero, que nadie le ponga luto. porque se va a descansar ese provecito difunto. Era un pobre jaibero pescando en el mes de febrero.
And that explain a little bit the word?
Well, it talks, like I said, about when they had a rough winter. For any reason at all, they would, the families, the men would have to fish crabs. Well, the crab fishermen, their problem was that they had a quota. In other words, maybe you could catch 10, maybe you could catch 8 baskets of crabs a day. The crabs weren't worth but about 15, 25 cents a basket. So they didn't care to fish crabs. They would all consider themselves, well, a couple of degrees below hog when they had to do this. So it wasn't popular at all.
Was trapping a big thing with the Islenos?
It was. Well, that was our main industry, trapping.
And
Fur
you trapped?
bears. I trapped just about all my life till I retired. That's about 10 years ago, but it got to the point where the muskrat aren't worth much, and we've lost so much of our wetlands that it's hard to make a living at it.
Was there a time when muskrat really kept the people going?
Oh yeah, there was a time when every trapper, you could expect them to catch anywhere from 4,000 to 12,000 muskrats in a 3-month season. So, and some years they were worth a lot of money. Some years they were worth $1.50, even $2. So this made them not want to fish crabs for sure. 25 cents a basket. Yeah, it was an industry that was our main industry. In fact, when we had a bad season trapping, the people in the lower part of New Orleans suffered because the Isleno was an individual that if he had money, he spent it, okay? And especially our parents and grandparents, they would buy the clothes and they would go out there and have tailor-made suits and what have you. And they spent their money, so naturally everybody prospered from a good winter. Now when the winter was bad, everybody suffered.
What do you imagine it was like for the first Islenos coming from the Canary Islands, which have mountains, which are pretty dry?
Oh, what it was like. It had to be terrible, really, because here they come from mountainous country, dry, and they come into these swamps, lower part of Louisiana. Mosquitoes, by the jillions, you could get them by the handsful. They managed to survive. Well, there's no way they could go back. You know, they brought them here to stay. And at that time, transportation was such that you couldn't board a plane, much less a ship, and go back to the Canary Islands, so they stayed here. And after the War of 1812, our people, there were a lot of fishermen. They had about 40 some more families that decided they got tired of plantation life and what have you, and working farmers. Well, you know how a farmer is. He might work all year and doesn't make a penny. So they wanted a better life. So they went into the lower part of St. Benoit Parish, which was Delacroix Island, Wyclosky, Shell Beach, and Flores in that area. So here they formed a nation within a nation. There was no highways. The only way they could get out was either by boat or by walking or by horseback or something. So everything they caught, they had to sell in New Orleans. So they followed the river road. This was the only road they had. It was the river, and it went straight to the French market. And here's where they sold their product. But every time they went to the French market, they managed to keep track of whatever ships either left the Canary Islands or left Spain. And they would communicate back and forth. So actually a lot of people that got off these ships wound up on the island, and they married into these lady families. So of the 34 families that went into the lower part of the parish, you got about 30,000 now. Islenos. They managed to multiply pretty good.
Do you think it was anything to do with the fact that it was so different? Did they learn to adapt to the land?
Oh, I'm sure it was. It was a challenge. And the idea that they was so independent and they were so united. Here was 34 families that actually acted like one family. So when they got down to the lower part of the parish, with St. Benoit and that area, and especially Delacroix Island, well, they started naming every lake, every pond, everything they could find points for what they left in the Canary Islands. That's how homesick they were. You take like Chandelier, La Candelaria, that's a patron saint of Tenerife. They named that. They named just about every lake you can mention. And whatever happened in a given lake, they gave a name to. They got along so fine that with them came the culture of being able to pass a collection, a limosna they call it in Spanish. Well, a collection, when you pass a collection, you pass it for a certain reason. It could be a death in one family, or it could be a sickness that they had to get to the doctor. At that time, it was, if you went to the doctor today, you didn't come back to Lamar. It was a 2-day trip from Delacroix Island. So when a person either lost a home, they lost their boat, or somebody was real sick, they would pass this collection, and they would unite and fix this man's house. If it was burnt down, they built another one. If the boat was broken, they'd fix it, or whatever. If they had needed a doctor, they'd take him to New Orleans. This is one of the way they lived, and respect was one of the things they really thought a lot of.
You mentioned trapping in the winter. How'd they make a living the rest of the year?
Well, you had a full season year. You had trapping, which was from around November, December, January, and February. Okay.
Let the plane go by and we'll start.
Well, after trapping season, then you had, yeah,
Again,
it was a 3-month season.
no, but you said a 4-season.
That's a 4-season year, right? In other words, you trapped, you avoid fishing crabs if you could, okay? But then you went to fishing. You fish freshwater fish, you fish what they call a slaughter pole line, and with tremble nets and what have you. You fish, but they had set their own laws in such a way, the Islenos did, that they would go out around Chandelier, Britain Island, Hog Island. They'd go to these bars, and as soon as the fish would start in row, they would get later to lay their eggs, they would get away from there. That was left for, not to be touched till after August. So they would go and after fishing, they'd go to shrimping. And shrimping would be maybe all the way to November. Some people fish crab, but it was just the people that had to, you know. So that was a 4-season work, and it was a very enjoyable life. I look back now and I realize that it's no more. You'll never see this again, where a person, regardless of how hard they had to work, if a child wanted to learn something, they would patiently sit down and teach him. Trapping. I started wood carving at the age of 10. I started wood carving because the community needed decoys. The only way you could get decoys is by making your own. And I used to love to draw and paint, and I could do some carving. So my daddy, at the time, he had been a market hunter. Later on, he became a guy.
And ask you, brother, explain what market hunting was.
Market hunting was that was before my time, really. Just about finished when that I can remember. They would go out into the marshes, and they would shoot the bird, the ducks, mostly French and pintails, mallards and pintails, for the market. They were allowed, most of the time, they were allowed about 25 each hunter. They might have 4 or 5 hunters in a because you got to realize they had to take these ducks and bring them to the French market. So market hunting went on for a long time, but by the time it about 6, 8 years, whatever, then they outlawed it. Of course, it was deadly. In many other places, even worse than home. But these people had passed laws that you didn't shoot after 9:30. Our people, if you were caught shooting after 9:30 in the morning, then they'd take your gun away from you. At 2 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock, you had to finish chopping wood for the next day, because they didn't want nobody firing a gun. They were freshwater system, everything was fresh water. So the ducks would go over the island, and a lot of them slept back of the island. At night, between the bullfrogs and everything else, the mosquitoes too, but the ducks, you could hardly sleep unless you was used to it. It was a real nice life. And the marshes were such that you could run over. I ran as high as 400 traps after I come out the service, and the marshes were solid. But after they started digging all these canals, and they brought in the Nutra, which we didn't like, but anyway, they brought them in. This created our problems, and we're losing our marshland and our wetlands so fast now that it's almost like you're almost afraid to think about tomorrow, really. Yeah. Like I said, you look back and you regret that this had to happen. And yet, hunting, I don't hunt anymore, because I used to hunt a lot. Used to make for my daddy, he was a guide, and we'd make duck callers. And we went into New Orleans and demonstrated them and sold them. This was one way to keep the family going. He was a guide, and I'd make decoys, and you'd sell them for $1.50. Well, now they're worth a lot more. So anyway,
this has been real good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you